As simple as the premise goes, it's very difficult in execution.
7-Eleven has weathered wars and recessions, but nothing prepared its CEO for these new tariffs. Sources say the CEO just had a full-blown meltdown behind closed doors. And once you hear who is benefiting from this deal, you'll understand why Trump may have just made his most unpopular move yet. According to multiple sources inside the convenience store giant, 7-Eleven's CEO completely lost it when news broke that the Trump administration had unexpectedly revived and expanded tariffs targeting imported goods from Asia and Latin America. We're talking about products that power the backbone of 7-Eleven's empire: packaged snacks, cheap electronics, bottled drinks, plastic containers, and store-brand items sourced from low-cost manufacturing zones. Practically overnight, a massive chunk of 7-Eleven's supply chain just got 20% more expensive. These aren't just tariffs. This is an act of economic war, and not even Trump's former allies are backing him up anymore. This entire firestorm traces back to Trump's decision to resurrect and escalate a set of tariffs originally proposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, i.e. EPA. You know, the same powers he tried to use to sidestep Congress back in his first term, and which the courts already smacked down.
Of course, all the tariffs didn't disappear, and they can impose other tariffs using other authorities, at least temporarily, based on a balance of payments or a trade.
Translation: the White House is playing tariff whack-a-mole, and businesses like 7-Eleven are the ones getting knocked over. Let's be clear, this wasn't supposed to happen again. Even Michael Froman, a former U.S. trade representative, said as much on air, calling Trump's use of emergency tariff tools legally dubious at best. And while Trump claims this will bring back American jobs, even his economic allies are warning it will tank the economy. Take Gary Schilling, one of the most respected market analysts alive today.
Supply chains, which were developed particularly in China over decades, the last 30 years or more, these take time to get reestablished. It isn't just a matter that you switch, but it's very disruptive.
The numbers don't lie. Most of 7-Eleven's products are sourced from a finely tuned global supply chain that was never meant to absorb these sudden costs. A single plastic cup now costs 30% more to import. Multiplied across tens of thousands of stores, that's a multi-million-dollar crisis every single month. Behind the scenes, the backlash from major corporations was so severe that Trump's own advisors started to panic. Sources say Trump called an emergency meeting to reassess the timeline for the tariff rollout. That's political speak for stalling, a familiar Trump tactic when the heat gets too high, but the damage may already be done. Because unlike previous trade fights that centered around foreign competitors, this time the fury is coming from America's own mega brands, the household names that helped fuel Trump's rise.
I think the challenge for President Trump and the administration is, if he wants to end up with a 10% tariff at the end of the day across the board, regardless of country, is that enough to actually move manufacturing to the United States? Is it enough to raise revenue to substitute for income taxes or to pay for his other tax cuts? Probably not.
Imagine the economic earthquake hitting American retailers like 7-Eleven with the new tariffs slamming down, but there's no domestic manufacturing muscle left to catch the falling shelves. This isn't just policy. It's a profit-crushing, supply chain shattering perfect storm poised to empty convenience stores and wallets nationwide. 7-Eleven, a lifeline for millions needing cheap snacks, essentials, and impulse buys, faces a suffocating squeeze because America simply cannot make enough of the goods it sells at prices customers can stomach. With hollowed-out U.S. factories incapable of ramping up affordable alternatives, 7-Eleven gets crushed between rocketing costs and furious customers. Wholesale prices skyrocket overnight as suppliers pass the tariff pain straight to retailers. Remember the last tariff war? Data from the U.S. Census Bureau and Bureau of Labor Statistics proves prices for imported household goods and electronics from China surged dramatically. BLS import-export price indexes. For 7-Eleven, operating on razor-thin net margins often between just 1% and 3%, absorbing these costs is financial suicide. But hiking prices is just as deadly. Their core customers, often budget-conscious, grabbing a soda or meal on the go, are fiercely sensitive to price jumps. Research firms like Numerator confirm convenience store shoppers exhibit high price elasticity. Even tiny increases cause them to flee or buy less. This brutal choice: bleed profits dry or watch customers vanish. The chaos deepens because America's withered manufacturing base means no quick escape. Tariffs explode established supply chains overnight. Finding U.S. factories to fill the gap, a fantasy. Scrambling to shift production to Vietnam or Mexico. Data from freight giants like Freightos shows massive, costly trade flow disruptions and extended lead times during previous tariff, risking catastrophic stockouts for 7-Eleven. Empty shelves aren't just inconvenient, they're a silent killer of customer trust and sales, and the damage spreads like wildfire. Tariffs on raw materials like steel and aluminum jacked up costs for everyone, including beverage can makers, whose price hikes inevitably hit 7-Eleven's coolers. This is inflation on steroids, rippling far beyond the initial tariff tariff targets. The terrifying truth? Without a thriving U.S. factory network, these tariffs aren't protective shields. They're blunt economic weapons detonating inside 7-Eleven stores. Higher costs they can't absorb, supply chains in tatters, shelves at risk of going bare, and customers pushed to the breaking point by price tags climbing higher and higher. Historical data from the 2018 to 2019 period confirms major retailers blamed tariffs for crushing their financial results. National Retail Federation tariff impact reports. For 7-Eleven, a beacon of convenience, the relentless pressure from Trump's tariffs combined with America's manufacturing vacuum threatens a devastating blow, eroding its very reason for existing: affordability and immediate access. The clock is ticking, and the stakes couldn't be higher. On the international scene, Russia and Ukraine completed their largest prisoner exchange since the war began, a massive 1,000 swap that brought families together amid ongoing violence. But what does this unprecedented exchange really tell us about the state of this brutal conflict?
The last time I saw him was in December 2021. He came home just for vacation. He always came for his father's birthday.
This is Tetiana, a mother whose son Artem has spent 3 years in Russian captivity. Her story represents thousands of families caught in this war's human cost. The exchange, conducted from May 23rd to May 25th, 2025, was the only tangible outcome of direct talks held in Istanbul, the first face-to-face negotiations between the two sides since early 2022. How exactly does such a massive operation unfold? The swap occurred in 3 carefully orchestrated phases near the Ukraine-Belarus border. On May 23rd, each side released 390 prisoners, 270 military personnel, and 120 civilians. The following day saw 307 additional military personnel exchanged, with the final 303 prisoners swapped on May 25th.
Well, indeed, both sides have lists with names, but those lists are not complete, so they are constantly changing, and not all names are confirmed. So sometimes it takes time to double check.
The complexity becomes clear when you understand the scale. This was the 64th prisoner swap since March 2022, with Ukraine reporting that 4,757 citizens had been released prior to this exchange. But the numbers tell only part of the story.
And the situation is very unequal. So Russia has more prisoners of war because it took a lot of Ukrainian soldiers, captured Ukrainian soldiers at the beginning of the invasion 3 years ago. And Russia also is still occupying a large piece of Ukrainian land.
Among those returned were 70 men involved in the 2022 Mariupol siege, including defenders of the Azovstal steel plant, who had been promised quick exchange 3 years ago. For their families, this moment represented the end of an agonizing wait.
The city would eventually fall, and as Russian troops encircled, Tetiana received what would be the last communication from her son.
I received an SMS from him in the evening where he wrote that there would be no contact for a long time. But don't worry, everything is really fine. I love you and I'm proud of my parents.
But what conditions did these prisoners endure? Released Ukrainian medical officer Volodymyr Labuzov, captured in Mariupol in 2022, revealed disturbing details. He reported severe mistreatment, including physical and psychological torture, violence, and offers to switch sides to join Russian forces. The inclusion of civilians marked a significant development. Ukraine considers many detained civilians as hostages held illegally, while Russia has sometimes claimed they are prisoners of war. Yet Ukraine's human rights ombudsman reports that over 16,000 Ukrainian civilians remain in Russian captivity.
In the 21st century, children are in such torture chambers. I'm a mother, I can't do anything. The worst thing is that I understand that at this moment he can be tortured, he can be there. I don't know what to do with him. I can't do anything.
The irony is stark. While families reunited, Russia launched its largest aerial assault of the war during the swap period, deploying 367 drones and missiles across Ukraine, killing at least 12 people. This contradiction highlights a troubling reality about modern warfare. What role did international pressure play? The Istanbul talks were initiated under pressure from US President Donald Trump, who broke convention by commenting on the swap as it unfolded. Trump suggested the exchange could lead to something big, though no subsequent diplomatic progress has materialized. For mothers like Tetiana, who has made daily 2-hour round trips to Kyiv for over a year to petition for her son's release, the exchange brings both hope and continued anguish.
At least feel that you're doing something, that you're not sitting. You're just doing what you can.
Doing what she can until she can do what she really wants.
I will hug him and say that I love him more than anything in the world.
The broader implications extend beyond individual families. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized the importance of bringing all captives home, noting that the swap was a rare moment of cooperation amid ongoing hostilities. However, the Istanbul talks failed to produce a ceasefire or other diplomatic breakthroughs, lasting less than 2 hours. This exchange, while humanitarian in nature, underscores a sobering reality. Prisoner swaps have become a practical necessity rather than a step toward peace. Previous swaps, such as one in September 2022 involving 215 Ukrainian prisoners from the Azovstal defense, occurred during intense fighting, suggesting these exchanges reflect the war's continuation rather than its conclusion. Yet for 2,000 individuals and their families, May 25th marked the end of captivity and the beginning of recovery. The question remains whether this largest exchange will be remembered as a humanitarian triumph or simply another chapter in a conflict that shows no signs of ending. 7 years of progress, gone in an instant. Pakistan reported its first polio case in nearly 7 years in the Diamer district of Gilgit-Baltistan, marking a devastating setback in the global fight against a disease that once paralyzed hundreds of thousands. But how did a virus travel from Pakistan's southern coast to its northern mountains? And what does this mean for worldwide eradication efforts? The case involves a 23-month-old child, and the implications extend far beyond one family's tragedy. Pakistan, alongside Afghanistan, remains one of only 2 countries where wild poliovirus type 1 transmission has never been interrupted. This single case represents a stark reminder of how quickly decades of progress can unravel. Pakistan recorded 306 wild poliovirus cases in 2014, dropping to just 1 case in 2021, an all-time low that offered hope for eradication. But 2024 saw a sharp resurgence with 68 cases by November, a 550% increase that has global health officials deeply concerned. What makes this Diamer case particularly troubling? The virus was genetically linked to strains circulating in Karachi, a historical polio reservoir over 1,000 kilometers away. The likely culprit? Tourism. Gilgit-Baltistan attracts thousands of visitors from Karachi during summer months, creating a pathway for viral transmission across vast distances. The timing couldn't be more ironic. The case was reported immediately after Pakistan completed its 3rd nationwide polio vaccination campaign of 2025, targeting 45 million children under 5. This juxtaposition highlights the challenges facing vaccination teams who must navigate not just logistics, but active resistance. The resistance takes many forms.
People say that it's not good, it's not right. They say there is something in this vaccine, that there is swine used in the vaccine, and some say that it takes your manhood away.
These aren't isolated opinions.
There is hate for this vaccine. Mullahs have issued 20 different statements. They say that it's an anti-Muslim campaign. It stops young boys from being able to produce several offspring when they are men. It limits them to only being able to produce 1 or 2 children. When they grow up, they lose their manhood and sexual urge. Britain and America are responsible for this.
The mistrust has deadly consequences. Since the 1990s, over 200 polio workers and security personnel have been killed in attacks by militant groups who view vaccination teams as Western agents. The Diamer case emerged alongside an attack on a polio eradication team in Sheiko village, where armed men fired on a team's vehicle, accusing them of ruining the environment by bringing unveiled women. But where does this resistance originate? Part stems from a 2011 CIA operation that used a fake vaccination campaign to locate Osama bin Laden, eroding trust in health workers. This single intelligence operation continues to reverberate through Pakistan's vaccination efforts more than a decade later. The challenge extends beyond security threats.
While living in Quetta, we didn't let our children take polio drops. The word was that it harms our children, that polio drops pose a threat. It will make the next generation impotent. We had no knowledge, and we used to take whatever our elders advised.
Health workers face a complex web of obstacles.
Some of them don't have any doorbell system. You have to walk up the stairs.
Lahore is a city of over 10 million people.
In a nation where 400,000 to 500,000 children are consistently missed during vaccination campaigns, every logistical challenge becomes a potential gateway for viral transmission. The scale of the challenge is staggering. Pakistan reported 402 wild poliovirus-positive environmental samples in 2024, compared to 126 in 2023, indicating widespread viral circulation far exceeding reported cases. This environmental surveillance reveals a troubling truth. For every paralyzed child, thousands of infections go undetected.
We go from village to village, house to house, and door to door, giving polio drops to those children whose parents initially refused. Sometimes we bring them an influential elder, like a Khan, Nazim, or Malik,
or even try ourselves to ensure that all the children are covered.
But dedicated workers face an uphill battle. The cross-border dimension complicates eradication efforts. Pakistan's porous border with Afghanistan facilitates viral transmission, with the forced repatriation of approximately 730,000 undocumented Afghan residents in 2024 cited as a spreading factor. The two countries are considered a single epidemiologic bloc due to shared borders and population movement. While the Supreme Court was authorizing mass deportations, another constitutional crisis was brewing in America's newsrooms and classrooms. On May 30th, PBS and one of its rural member stations filed a federal lawsuit challenging President Trump's executive order to defund all public broadcasting. The stakes couldn't be higher: the survival of Sesame Street, local news in rural America, and the educational programming that reaches half the children in the country who don't attend pre-K. But this isn't just about Big Bird or NPR's Morning Edition. It's about whether a president can use financial coercion to silence media organizations that displease him, and whether Congress's power of the purse extends to protecting journalistic independence.
And look, for more than 50 years, we have been serving our member stations. Remember, we're not a network. I think a lot of people are a little confused about who we are and how we're organized. We were created by our member stations to do for them at scale what individual stations couldn't do by themselves. An individual station wouldn't be able to create a news hour and a Sesame Street and a Mr. Rogers and Ken Burns' great work and Nova and so forth.
The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, names President Trump and several administration officials, including OMB Director Russell Vought and Education Secretary Linda McMahon. It follows NPR's similar lawsuit filed just 3 days earlier, creating a coordinated legal challenge to what both organizations characterize as blatant viewpoint discrimination and textbook retaliation against protected speech. Trump's May 1st executive order declared that PBS and NPR were producing biased and partisan news content, failing to provide fair, accurate, unbiased, and nonpartisan news. The order claimed that government funding for public media was corrosive to journalistic independence and unnecessary given private media alternatives. It instructed the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to halt all funding to PBS and NPR, while directing federal agencies to terminate any direct or indirect funding. The immediate impact was swift and devastating. The Department of Education canceled a $78 million ready-to-learn grant to CPB and PBS just 1 day after the executive order. This grant supported educational programming including Sesame Street, Clifford the Big Red Dog, and Reading Rainbow, programs that provide early childhood education for millions of American children.
And I know that they are aligned with us in wanting to ensure that we're able to do our work. You know, when we were created, we were specifically designed to ensure that there was no influence by anyone, whether that's government or anyone else. And so there is a firewall that protects the funding that comes from the federal government into public broadcasting.
The funding structure PBS describes reveals why Trump's order is so destructive. PBS receives about 15 to 16% of its $373.4 million annual budget directly from CPB grants, roughly $81 million annually. But 61% of its budget comes from dues paid by local member stations, which are themselves partly funded by federal grants. The executive order threatens to cut off both direct and indirect funding, potentially crippling local stations that depend on federal support to purchase PBS programming. The public response has been immediate and passionate. Penn State's WPSU, which derives about 20% of its budget from federal funding, represents the situation facing stations nationwide. Local communities are realizing what they stand to lose, not just entertainment, but educational programming that parents rely on for their children's development.
I feel like with these shows, like kids can take what they're like learning in schools and like see it like in real world or like in the show and kind of like see applications of what they're learning in like a fun, engaging way.
I mean, I'm sure that helped my education when I was younger, so it's just a shame. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen next.
The lawsuit's legal arguments mirror NPR's case, but focus on PBS-specific impacts. The complaint alleges First Amendment violations through blatant viewpoint discrimination, arguing that the executive order constitutes retaliation based on programming content. The order's explicit reference to PBS programming featuring a drag queen and a documentary about a transgender teenager serves as evidence of content-based discrimination. The separation of powers argument is equally compelling. PBS argues that Trump's order usurps Congress's constitutional authority to appropriate funds. The Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 specifically created the CPB as a private nonprofit corporation to insulate public media from political interference, with funding decisions made by Congress and distributed independently. Susan Goldberg, CEO of GBH, provided crucial insight into the industry's response and the broader implications. She emphasized that the CPB is not an agency of his administration, but rather a private nonprofit corporation that was authorized by Congress in 19 1,967 inches specifically to insulate public broadcasting from political interference. The Trump administration's assault on public media extends beyond the May 1st executive order. In April 2025, Trump attempted to fire 3 CPB board members, prompting the CPB to file its own lawsuit asserting that the president lacks authority to remove board members of a private nonprofit. The administration has also signaled plans to ask Congress to rescind CPB funding entirely, while Republican-led bills in Congress aim to defund NPR and PBS completely.
Half the children in this country are not enrolled in formal pre-K. But we are here, and we are here with content that's not just safe, but it is also based on key skills that kids need to master before they enter school for the first time, whether that's at age 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Skills of counting and numbers and everything else that they need to be successful.
Paula Kerger's defense of PBS programming reveals what's truly at stake. PBS serves as the primary pre-K educational resource for half of America's children, providing crucial early learning experiences that prepare them for academic success. The programming isn't just entertainment. It's research-based educational content designed to teach fundamental skills without the commercial pressures that drive other children's television. Beyond education, PBS serves critical infrastructure functions that the lawsuit highlights. PBS technology serves as backup for America's wireless emergency alert system, an investment the federal government made precisely because public broadcasters reach every part of the country for free through their digital infrastructure. This emergency preparedness role demonstrates that PBS funding serves broader national interests beyond media programming. The timing of the legal attack is particularly striking given public broadcasting's recent achievements. GBH alone received 18 Emmy nominations, including 10 for Frontline, which won an Oscar in 2024. These aren't partisan propaganda pieces, but internationally acclaimed journalism and documentary programming that educates millions while maintaining editorial independence.
When you look at who watches our programs, about a third of the people identify themselves as being liberal, about a third say they are independent or somewhere in the middle, and about a third say that they are conservative.
Susan Goldberg's audience data challenges the administration's bias claims. Public broadcasting serves a politically diverse audience, with equal thirds identifying as liberal, independent, and conservative. This broad appeal suggests that quality programming transcends political boundaries, contradicting allegations of partisan bias. The economic ripple effects extend far beyond media organizations. In rural communities where public broadcasting often serves as a major employer and cultural anchor, the loss of federal funding threatens entire local economies. These stations don't just provide programming. They employ local residents, purchase local services, and serve as community gathering points for events and education. The political battle reflects deeper tensions over media independence and government funding. Congress appropriated $535 million to the CPB for fiscal year 2025, with approximately 75% directed to television and 25% to radio. The funding was designed to be allocated years in advance precisely to prevent political interference, yet the administration argues it has authority to redirect these congressionally appropriated funds. PBS seeks a court declaration that the executive order is unconstitutional and unlawful, plus injunctive relief to block enforcement. The organization is requesting expedited relief to prevent immediate financial harm, particularly the loss of the $78 million educational grant that was canceled within days of the executive order. While NPR receives only about 1% of its budget directly from the CPB, but 10% indirectly through local station dues, PBS faces greater direct impact with 15 to 16% direct funding and 61% indirect funding through member stations. This funding structure explains why PBS emphasizes the threat to local stations and educational programming, while NPR focuses more on journalistic independence and news programming. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like to watch another fascinating video like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now.